So, I've opened every one of these interviews with the same question.
Okay.
How'd you know Paul Smoker?
I knew Paul as an undergrad here at Naz. The first interaction I had with him was a form and analysis class. And it was an upper division theory class. And I did horribly in it. Because, as you know, Paul used to know everything. He knew everything, and there was no getting anything past him. And I just didn't do well. So my initial working with Paul was not a super positive experience, just because I didn't do well in the class. So, Paul tried to help with things, but it just I think I got a C- or something in the class. So that was the fall, I think, of '93. And then maybe a year or two later, Dr. Tim Sullivan, he was the jazz band director prior to Paul actually becoming the jazz person here. Dr. Sullivan went on vacation, he went on sabbatical. Mm-hmm. And Paul did jazz ensemble for the semester. And that's when I really got involved with Paul. And, I started taking some lessons with him, both playing and compositionally. And we would just work on stuff and listen to stuff. He'd give me things to listen to and transcribe and just learn the language of jazz, because there was very little jazz here. There was only jazz ensemble, and it wasn't even a full big band at that time. So,
so you talked about, I want to ask about that first class, because I've gotten a couple good stories about Paul's teaching style, and It seems like you might have had an interesting first class with him.
Yeah.
What was he like as a teacher? And obviously you guys, developed a really strong relationship after that first class, but, what was he like as a teacher for you?
Well, like I said, initially he and I didn't have a super strong connection with him, just because I was not, I guess, in a place where I understood where he was coming from. Yeah. So later on, when I started studying privately with him, I found that our relationship, kind of blossomed at that point, because it was not a classroom setting. It was it was one-on-one. So we could bounce ideas off each other. I could bring something in and show him what I was working on, and we could go through it and, well, why don't we try this, and why don't we try that? And it became a real mentorship and apprentice type thing, I think, which was really very helpful to me. That's the best way I know how to teach and how to learn, is that one-on-one relationship, which it's just invaluable.
What were those one-on-one experiences like? Were you guys playing tunes? Were you doing improvisation? What were those early one-on-one sessions?
Yeah, we when Bev and Paul lived on Garnsey Road, I would just go over to the house and we would, play along with Jamie Abersold's stuff, and he would correct some of the stuff that I was playing. We'd sit at the piano when we were writing and, well, check that voicing. I see what you're doing there, but check this voicing against this voicing. See why this one works better because of where you're going or where you've come from and things like that. So, he was very, very helpful with, again, learning the language.
Yeah. I heard a lot of burning CDs story as well. Do you remember any of the CDs?
Oh yeah, every lesson he'd have a lesson. Have a CD. He'd hand me a CD. Go listen to this. Mm-hmm. One in particular that actually came up later was a Rudolph Johnson CD that he gave me, a nice tenor player, and for me that was okay. That'll do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned '93 was your first class with him,
mm-hmm.
and we've talked a lot about that teaching relationship, which I want to explore again in a moment or two. But you guys also became colleagues at some point, and then you were playing some of his,
Yeah, I had him.
How did that, because how did you navigate going from, being his teacher to, or his student rather, and eventually kind of taking over, his role in a way here in Nazareth in the jazz department?
Well, I think that's two separate things. Mm-hmm. I think Paul, I think Paul was sort of looking to prepare someone, and I'd like to think that, through our lessons, that was kind of one of the things that he was doing, but it might not be. I mean, he was just preparing us in general to play. But I had always kind of wanted a collegiate teaching thing. So I lived in New Jersey for a couple of years. I was subbing on the Broadway shows, like I was just telling the other young lady about. And, that was the steady work. And then I could play jazz, and whatever we got paid is whatever we got paid, and I was learning on the stand. And that's really what Paul was talking about, I think, was, keep learning. And as far as this job and following him, I think that had more to do with Bev, because Bev was the chair at the time when I was hired. So that's, I interviewed for the job against a couple other people, and that's sort of how it came about. So I've been here, this is my 8th year.
You talked about this moment where you played half of some of his compositions at a concert, and some of yours, and it's this passing of the torch moment. Why don't you talk to me about that show and some of his compositions for a college band?
Sure. That concert that you're talking about, I think, was my 2nd year, so that would have been spring of 19. And what I thought we'd do, since when I first got here, we only had one big band, and I managed with the students to grow it into 2 big bands. So we still have 2 big bands. One is jazz ensemble. Jazz ensemble is one on a part. All the saxophones play clarinet and flute, because that's my background, and you will do it, or else you will feel the wrath of Smoker. And the second band is lab band, and they're developing and like that, so anyone can play. That was something that I always wanted to have happen, and I wanted to make sure everyone had a spot. It didn't matter if you could play 3 notes. It didn't matter if you were the best saxophone player. It didn't matter to me. I wanted to have anyone that wanted to come out for jazz to be involved. Mm-hmm. Going back to that, the big band charts that I chose from Paul's library were all things that he composed, and they reminded me of another composer in town, Howard Rowe, in as much as they were sort of geared for a younger band. Mm-hmm. So the first half of the concert was lab band, and they played all of Paul's tunes, and they're in the library here, and we can pull them out or whatever. And then the second half was the jazz ensemble, and they played all of my arrangements or my tunes. And it was really kind of a nice moment, because the students in the program at that time knew Paul a little bit. They had him for like a year. But that was really the changeover of, okay, Paul's kids are leaving now. Now these are really, Brad's kids. So that was a nice moment. And we included, at that time, we had a CMP, community music program. We included a choir on 2 of those pieces. And it was really nice. My daughter was in the choir at that point. She was a little kid at that point. But it was like a legacy and a generational thing. I mean, you could feel Paul. I could feel Paul going, no. I'm like, okay.
Well, This is the other thing I wanted to talk about was just you talked about how you learned from him the mentor apprentice model, and that's how you teach. Any lessons that that he used with you that you are definitely now using with your students, or his general approach probably does not work for every other teacher out there, but what really in that time together, now that you're a teacher, what techniques, strategies, would you take from him as a teacher that you're not using as a teacher?
Well, I think one of the biggest things that I took away from him was that all of us called him Paul. He hated, or I don't know, maybe he didn't hate it, but Professor Smoker, I mean, he just wasn't his thing, we're always Paul. And I really don't like the moniker professor either, because when I think of a professor, I think of someone that's just telling you what to do. I don't want to be telling you what to do. I want to be guiding you in a way that you can kind of figure out some of the stuff on your own and come up with your own conclusions on things. And I think that's the most helpful thing that Paul gave me was, well, yeah, that's a nice voicing, but what came before it, what came after it? And he never told me no. He would curse me out if I got things wrong. He had a colorful vocabulary, and I was on the receiving end of that a number of times. I can remember one time in ensemble that I was playing lead alto, and he let me have it because I wasn't prepared, and he was right.
Yeah.
He was right.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing that strikes me, is that even with that tough teaching style, I have still talked to so many people who still loved and respected him either at that. So why do you think you responded to that kind of teaching and guidance?
Well, I think partially the way he approached me was a lot like my dad, my uncle growing up. It was that tough love kind of thing, it's like, well, why'd you do it that way, dummy? Why'd you get hurt? That's why you got hurt. Well, there it is. What'd you think was going to be the outcome? So I think, maybe it was a generational thing. Maybe it was the fact that, he's German and my dad's German, that whole culture thing. I don't know. But, there was a lot of similarities there, and I learned an awful lot from him. There's still stuff, even, let's see, when did he go? He was 2016. There's still stuff that I work on that he gave me. I'll pull it out and, oh, that's why it sounds like that. And, okay, yep. So the lessons still are evolving from him, and I try and pass that along to the students.
We've talked a lot about Paul, the educator. I do want to talk about Paul, the trumpet player as well. He was in, taught the ensemble. You guys probably shared a couple gigs together, I would imagine. What was it like sharing the bandstand with him?
It was intimidating. Yeah. I remember the semester that we were talking about when Tim was on sabbatical. He and I played a duo in the middle of the concert, and Paul sat down at the piano and played, and I played saxophone, and I was scared out of my mind. But it was like playing with your dad. It's like your dad intimidates you, but he's there to catch you. So, musically speaking, I think he was one of the forefathers for me. We all have mentors and teachers that really mean something to us. And I think I've had 4 that have been really, really, really special and really helped me get to where I needed to be at that given moment. And Paul knew what I needed, gave it to me, and wouldn't accept anything less.
How do you remember him now?
Oh, man. I remember Paul pretty much in everything I do here. Because I can hear him. I can hear him still, just, yeah, no, that's not going to be, that. No, make him do it this way, or, and it's not like someone in my head talking to me. It's like, okay, how would Paul do this? Why would Paul do it this way? And, go from there with it. And I'd like to think, spiritually, I'd like to think he's here, still kicking me in my fanny and trying to help me kick the kids in theirs and still trying to push the program forward. And I think that's the biggest honor that I have, is just continuing this legacy of Tim Sullivan and Paul Smoker and now me, and then hopefully somebody else after me that'll, was part of Nazareth, or, at least knew Paul, or, was a student of mine. Just, it's a generational thing.
Yeah.
So.
I have to ask about the concert coming up, 2 nights, Friday, Saturday, and then the jam session.
Mm-hmm.
It's a cool opportunity for a lot of people who played with Paul, and celebrating his life and some of his recorded music too. It's kind of the question of legacy. What do you think about the fact that all these musicians are getting together, hopefully yourself included, on a couple tunes, getting together to celebrate him? What do you think about the concerts coming up?
Well, I think as a teacher in general, I like to think of, the immortality that goes along with being a teacher, because, Paul's generation taught me, I teach the next generation, but there's part of Paul in what I teach. And hopefully that'll continue along the line. So I think for me, the coolest part of this is going to be seeing everybody that was touched by Paul, or had something to do with Paul, or just even knew Paul, because Paul, even when I would go to visit him towards the end, I would go over to the house and we'd just sit and talk and whatever. We'd just talk about a little music and whatever, and he wouldn't want to really talk about it too much, towards the end. But I always got something out of him about it, and I'd always go check it out. And he was always teaching, and that's what inspires me to teach, honestly, is the fact that basically until the end, he was continuing to give his students, me in particular, things to go and check out, things to listen to, things to check and just be involved in, and the immortality of that.
Anything I didn't ask about that you'd like to add?
I don't know. I think of Paul often, and whenever I do, or whenever I'm going to get mad, I got to put on the filter because I can't talk like Paul anymore. So, I just hope that he would be happy with how things have progressed since I've gotten here.
Cool. Thanks, man.
Yeah.